In the silence of the night, the wide desert roads of Albuquerque stretched endlessly into the distance. As the sun sank below the horizon, the sky shifted from orange to violet, and within one of the city's modest houses lived a quiet yet brilliant man. His name was Walter White. Walter had devoted his life to chemistry. Behind his glasses, he taught lessons in classrooms where the formulas on the chalkboard seemed like lifeless scribbles to most students. But to Walter, they were alive, symbols that whispered the deep secrets of existence. He was gentle, reserved, and calm. Yet life had not rewarded him for his knowledge. On a modest teacher's salary, he barely supported his family, and to make ends meet, he worked at a car wash after school. Surrounded by soap and suds, scrubbing dirt from strangers' cars, his unspoken thoughts lingered in the air. Is this really all there is to life? At home, his wife Skylar carried the weight of pregnancy while keeping track of every dollar and bill at the kitchen table. Their son, Walter Jr., struggled daily with health challenges yet faced the world with courage. Walter's heart was full of love for them, yet in its depths lay an unspoken despair. Then one morning, everything changed. In a doctor's office, the words landed like cold stones: lung cancer. For a moment, time itself slowed. Walter's eyes fixed on a single point, not because of fear for himself, but for those he would leave behind. Skylar. Walter Jr. What kind of world would they face without him? How would they live? How would they survive? The news rippled through Walter's inner sea of silence. He no longer wished to fade away in ordinary days. Something had to be done. He needed to leave behind more than memories. He needed to leave security, stability. That thought lit a spark inside him, one that could not be ignored. And fate, with quiet precision, brought him face to face with an old student, Jesse Pinkman. Jesse had never cared for the elegance of chemistry. His lessons had been the streets, not the classroom. But to Walter, Jesse was not simply a lost student. He was the key to another world. Walter held knowledge that was pure, precise, unshakable. Jesse held the knowledge of how that precision could breathe in the darker corners of life. That night, as Walter lay awake, the thought grew heavier. If my days are numbered, I don't want them wasted. I must leave something behind. The idea followed him into his dreams, lingered like a whisper, until at last it became more than just an idea. In the silence of the desert, a decision took shape. One that would turn Walter White from an ordinary man into someone unrecognizable. But for now, it was only the beginning. A quiet beginning, soft as a lullaby, drifting through the night. No one could know yet. This journey would rise like a storm, born from the silence of a single decision. And now, close your eyes. Let the desert wind brush against your face. As Walter drifts into his own thoughts, you too can drift into yours. We are only at the first step of this long journey. Everything else will come in its time, in its silence. A new morning rose over the vast horizon of Albuquerque. The silence of the desert was broken only by a soft breeze. Yet inside Walter White's mind, that morning carried a far heavier silence. The news of his illness still echoed in his thoughts. Lying in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, he stayed motionless for long minutes. Skylar, busy with her morning routine, didn't notice his quietness, but deep within Walter's heart, a storm was stirring. In the classroom, surrounded by the noise of students, Walter tried to carry on as usual. The symbols he wrote on the board, elements and equations, felt more meaningful than ever. To him, every letter, every number was now a reminder of time slipping away. Among the uninterested stares of his students, Walter felt himself fading, becoming invisible. He carried a lifetime of knowledge, yet he saw it slowly dissolving before his eyes. And then, a door to a new fate quietly opened. His brother-in-law, Hank Schrader, showed him a side of life Walter had never truly seen. Hank, cheerful and loud, belonged to a completely different world, the world of law enforcement, fighting against drugs. One day, Hank invited Walter to witness a piece of his work. He wanted to show him the reality behind the big raids often seen on television. Walter agreed, thinking it would be just a harmless curiosity. But what he saw soon awakened something long asleep inside him. The rough methods of the raid, the desperation on the faces of those who tried to escape, and most of all, the money. Bundles of cash stacked inside bags, more than a lifetime of Walter's honest work could ever bring. While Hank joked and laughed, Walter's eyes caught something else. One of the fleeing young men looked familiar. Jesse Pinkman. A former student long ago. Someone who had ignored chemistry, uninterested in formulas, chasing a different kind of lesson. The streets. Seeing Jesse in that moment wasn't just a reminder of the past. For Walter, it looked like a sign of the future. That night, as Walter lay awake, Skylar sleeping peacefully beside him, he made a quiet promise to himself. The thought that had been growing inside him was no longer just an idea. It was becoming a path. He would use his knowledge of chemistry, not in the classroom, but for something else, something final, something that could secure his family's future when he no longer could. The next morning, Walter knocked on Jesse's door. Jesse was stunned to see his old teacher standing there. Their conversation was tense, almost absurd, but at the same time carried by an invisible thread of fate. At first, Jesse laughed at the proposal, but in Walter's eyes there was something unshakable, something Jesse couldn't ignore. These were no longer the eyes of a tired teacher. As the sun set over the desert, Walter and Jesse began to shape their first plan, a plan that would transform both of their lives forever. And now, close your eyes. Feel the quiet determination rising in Walter's chest. Let the desert wind brush softly against your face. This story is only beginning, carried on the silent footsteps of a man who dared to defy his fate. The road is long, the night is deep, but you can gently drift into sleep. The sky over Albuquerque glowed with the orange of late afternoon, while Walter White's mind overflowed in silence. He knew he had stepped onto a path with no return. That conversation at Jesse A.'s door was not just a proposal, it was the turning point of his life. Walter would use his knowledge of chemistry to leave behind something that could outlast his days. Jesse, however, was still doubtful. To him, it seemed absurd that his old high school teacher would suddenly appear with such an idea. You want to get into the drug business?" he asked, half laughing. But there was no tremor in Walter's expression. The firmness in his gaze told Jesse that this was no joke. Walter A.'s mind clung to one vision, creating a product as pure and flawless as science itself could achieve. For Jesse, the thought was both exciting and terrifying. The streets were filled with danger, rival dealers, violent risks. Yet in Walter's eyes, Jesse saw something different, something stronger than fear, the value of time. Before long, the two found themselves preparing in the middle of the desert. Jesse had brought an old RV, rusted, worn, but still functional. Walter slipped on his lab apron, and for a moment the teacher within him awakened again. Each movement of his hands carried the rhythm of formulas, silent but precise. Inside the RV, a strange laboratory took shape. Walter's measured gestures, the way he combined each ingredient, felt almost like a quiet symphony. Jesse watched in astonishment. This is like one of your classes," he muttered. Walter nodded slightly. "It is a class, Jesse, but the outcome of this one will be very different." As the hours passed, crystals began to take form. Blue, shining, unlike anything Jesse had ever seen before. The purity, the brightness, it was perfection. Jesse's eyes widened as he exclaimed, This is amazing!" Walter's face carried both pride and sorrow, because those crystals were not just a product. They were the symbol of the choice he had made about the rest of his life. That night, the desert wind circled the RV with a haunting whistle. Walter stepped outside and looked up at the sky. The stars blinked faintly, distant yet watchful. No one could hear the words he whispered softly to himself. "I am doing this for my family." In that silence, under the endless stars, Walter and Jesse had crossed into a new chapter of their lives. What they didn't yet realize was that this journey was only beginning. Ahead lay a world filled with danger, darkness, and uncertainty. And now, close your eyes. Hear the quiet wind of the desert. Imagine the cold shimmer of the stars above. With Walter's determination echoing softly, you too can drift toward rest. The journey will be long, but for now you can let go and sleep peacefully. In the middle of the desert, the old RV was no longer just a vehicle. It had become the place where Walter and Jesse's fate shifted. After their first trial, Walter organized the makeshift lab with calm precision, while Jesse's eyes still carried astonishment. The purity of the crystals was unlike anything he had ever seen on the streets. Fear and excitement intertwined inside him. Walter, however, appeared composed. For years, his life had been devoted to test tubes and chalkboard formulas, but now that knowledge was being poured into something entirely different. His silence was not emptiness, it was the stillness at the center of a storm. Every movement of his hands was careful, exact. Standing beside him, Jesse felt once again like a student watching his teacher. But this new world had different rules. Jesse explained the darker side of the streets. The money was tempting, but the dangers were real. Walter listened carefully. Then in a quiet voice he said, "If my formulas are correct, our only difference will be purity. No matter how dirty or mixed their product is, ours will be perfect." Soon, Walter's creation began to attract attention. As Jesse carried the product out into the world, he saw the reactions in people's eyes, the shock, the awe. That blue shimmer was like a signal in the ordinary, a beacon that could not go unnoticed. But such purity was also a warning. Others would come for it. One evening, Jesse returned pale from a deal. "Walter," he said, "this is more dangerous than you think. People will chase this. It's not just about money. Our lives are on the line." Walter heard his words, but kept his gaze fixed on the horizon, watching the clouds turn darker. Inside, a single thought echoed. "I am already racing against time." At home that night, Skylar served dinner and spoke of ordinary things, of Walter Jr.'s struggles at school, of bills and concerns. Her eyes held worry. But Walter's mind remained with the RV, with the experiment beneath the desert sky. His secret weighed on him, but instead of burden, it gave him strength. It fueled his determination. That night, he whispered to himself, "This road may be dangerous, but I have no choice. I am here for my family." And the desert wind carried his words into the distance. "Now, close your eyes. Imagine the rusted frame of the RV, standing in silence against the wind. Feel Walter's quiet determination echoing within you. The journey has only just begun, but within this stillness you can drift peacefully into sleep." After their first experiment in the desert, the lines of Walter White's life began to blur. On one side stood the teacher who wrote formulas on the chalkboard, and on the other, the man who worked with steady hands inside an RV lab. They were the same person, but they no longer lived the same life. Jesse's unease was growing. Whispers had started to spread across the streets. "A new product," they said. "Something flawless, glowing with a blue shimmer." And whispers could reach the wrong ears. Jesse warned Walter again and again. But Walter's eyes held a determination that would not fade. "There is no turning back for me," he said. At home, Skylar had begun to notice the changes. Some nights, Walter came to bed late. Other times, he sat in silence for long minutes, lost in thought. She told herself it was the weight of his illness, but the truth Walter carried inside was far heavier. One day, Jesse told him, "If we're going to keep doing this, we'll have to keep certain people happy. The streets have their own rules." Walter's reply was quiet but firm. "My formulas set the rules." That day they faced their first real danger. One of Jesse's contacts wanted to see the product. A meeting was arranged at the edge of the desert, just as the sun was setting. Jesse was nervous, but Walter remained calm. Inside the RV they waited. Then footsteps outside, and the man arrived. When he saw the crystals, his eyes gleamed with greed. "I want this," he said, "but not on your terms, on mine." Walter looked silently at Jesse. Jesse's face betrayed his fear. But within Walter there was only a strange calm. As the desert wind circled them, Walter's inner voice whispered, "Time is short for me. I have nothing left to fear." That night, back home, Walter looked into Skylar's eyes across the dinner table. She sensed something shifting, though she could not name it. Walter said nothing. The secret inside him had become his silent companion. The desert, the RV, the formulas, they were now the quiet witnesses of his new life. Witnesses to a road from which there was no return. And now, close your eyes. Feel the evening chill of the desert. Imagine the distant sound of footsteps. Let the quiet determination in Walter's gaze echo gently within you. The road stretches on, and you can drift softly into sleep. After the desert meeting, Walter and Jesse's path was set. There was no going back. Jesse, uneasy with the danger, carried his worries heavily. But inside Walter, despite the shadow of illness, a strange determination grew. Knowing that time was short didn't frighten him, it pushed him forward. The next day in class, Walter stood at the board, watching the indifferent faces of his students. Their chatter was nothing but a distant hum to him now. Chemistry was no longer just a subject, it was the key to transformation. And that key was no longer in the classroom, but inside a rusted RV in the desert. At home, Skylar grew more observant. She noticed the distant look in Walter's eyes at night, the way silence stretched around him. At the dinner table, his quietness sometimes rose like a wall between them. Skylar believed it was the weight of illness. If she had known the truth, she would have seen that behind that silence lay the scent of the desert and the glow of blue crystals. Jesse warned Walter again. This isn't just about a lab. The more people hear about this product, the more they'll come after us. We're only at the beginning. Walter's reply was calm. Then we'll be more careful. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Walter and Jesse sat outside the RV, watching the desert turn red. Walter broke the silence. You know, Jesse, life is like a reaction. With the right conditions, it begins. With one wrong move, it ends. But now, I will write the equation myself. Jesse looked at him and no longer saw the old teacher, but someone entirely new. As night fell, the silence inside the RV deepened. Walter's hands moved over the measuring cups, steady and precise, while Jesse listened to the desert wind outside. Without saying it aloud, both of them knew, no matter how dangerous the road ahead, they would walk it together. Later that night, Walter returned home. Skylar was awake, watching him closely. "Are you hiding something?" she asked. Walter smiled faintly and shook his head. "No," he said simply. But inside, the secret continued to grow. The desert night filled with the sound of wind brushing against the RV's metal frame. That sound was like a lullaby, carrying Walter deeper into his new life. The desert's silence had become the soundtrack of Walter White and Jesse Pinkman's new life. The rusted RV grew day by day into both a laboratory and a shrine for secrets. Yet beneath that silence, the first signs of an approaching storm had begun to emerge. Jesse carried the whispers of the streets back to Walter. Everyone's talking about this blue product, but drawing this much attention, it isn't good. There was fear in his voice. Walter, gazing out the RV window toward the horizon, replied quietly, "Anything perfect will draw attention, and I am here for perfection." Meanwhile, Hank appeared on television, boasting about new operations, laughing as he mocked criminals. Walter listened to his brother-in-law's hearty laughter, all the while thinking of the secret growing within him. His own creation was purer, stronger than anything Hank was chasing. The thought filled Walter with tension and with a hidden pride. At home, Skylar felt Walter slipping further away. She watched him lie awake at night, eyes fixed on the ceiling, lost in thought. One evening she asked, "Are you keeping something from me?" Walter smiled gently. "Just dealing with the illness," he said. But the truth within him was now etched deep into his heart. One day, Jesse announced a new buyer, But this one was no ordinary customer, dangerous, violent. Jesse's eyes showed his unease. Still, Walter did not step back. "We need the money, Jesse, and this product will be sold, but the terms will be mine." Inside the RV, Walter prepared with steady hands. Chemistry was still the quiet melody of science for him. Yet now that melody intertwined with fate. Watching him, Jesse whispered in awe, "You're different now. You're not the teacher from school anymore." Walter adjusted his glasses and replied, "Maybe I've always been this way. You're just seeing it now." That night, stars glimmered above the desert sky. As the wind brushed against the metal walls of the RV, Walter stepped outside. He lifted his eyes upward and whispered to himself, "My time may be short, but I will leave my mark on this world." The desert absorbed his words in silence. The blue crystals Walter and Jesse created were no longer attracting just casual buyers on the streets. Darker figures had begun to notice. Jesse's fears were becoming reality. New customers wanted more than the product. They wanted control. This was a world Walter had never stepped into before. One day, Jesse came to the RV with tension written across his face. "We have to meet them," he said. Walter adjusted his glasses without a word. Inside there was no fear, only a strange calm. For him, the only truth that mattered was how little time he had left. Everything else was just another equation to solve. The meeting took place at the edge of the desert. The last rays of the sun painted the sky crimson as Walter and Jesse presented their work. The men who arrived could not hide their amazement at the crystals, but admiration soon shifted into greed. "You'll make this for us," they demanded. Jesse's eyes widened with fear. Walter, however, did not flinch. "The terms will be mine," he said softly. Those words were a step taken right into the heart of danger. Jesse could hardly believe Walter's boldness, but Walter's silence carried more power than fear itself. For a man living under the shadow of death, threats no longer held the same weight. Later that night, back in the RV, Jesse asked quietly, "Why aren't you afraid?" Walter didn't answer at first. He stared out into the horizon, then whispered, "Because I have no time to lose." At home, Skylar noticed the distant look in his eyes. Once again, she asked, "Are you hiding something?" Walter offered a tired smile and shook his head. No. Yet the secret inside him grew heavier each day. As night fell, the desert wind brushed against the rusted frame of the RV, turning into a song that seemed to whisper Walter's journey. A song that called him forward, even in the shadow of danger. Each step into the desert's silence drew Walter White and Jesse Pinkman deeper into a life they could not escape. The blue crystals no longer created only curiosity, they carried the scent of danger. Jesse's warnings echoed constantly, but Walter's resolve did not falter. He lived beneath the shadow of death. For him, fear had lost its meaning. One night, they sat quietly inside the RV. Moonlight filtered through the small window, casting pale light across Walter's face. Jesse broke the silence. "This could be the end of us." Walter removed his glasses and sat in silence for a long moment. Then softly, he spoke. "Maybe, Jesse, but tell me, how else should I live? If my days are numbered, should I waste them obeying rules written by others?" Or should I write the equation myself? Jesse said nothing. The silence inside the RV thickened. Outside, the desert wind howled, echoing Walter's words like a distant agreement. The next evening, Skylar noticed his strangeness even more. At dinner, Walter's gaze lingered on nothing, his mind far away. She could not see the thoughts racing within him, but her heart felt something was wrong. "Walter," she asked with worry, "you've been so distant. Are you keeping something from me?" Walter lifted his head, offered a faint smile, and replied simply, "No, just tired." But behind that smile, a secret grew heavier. Meanwhile, Jesse felt the streets tightening around them. The name of the blue product was spreading fast. Rivals, predators, violent men. It was only a matter of time before they took notice. One night, Jesse confronted Walter, anger burning in his voice. "Your product is driving everyone insane. People are fighting over it. This isn't science anymore. This is death." Walter remained calm, his voice low and steady. "Every discovery in science comes with a price. I am willing to pay it." Those words chilled Jesse, yet something in them also stirred him. In Walter's eyes, he no longer saw the weary teacher, but a man defying fate, standing tall even under the shadow of death. That night, Walter stood alone in the backyard. The stars stretched endlessly above him. He stared at them one by one, whispering to himself, "My time may be short, but I will not leave this world without leaving a mark." The silence of the night bore witness to his vow. Now, close your eyes. Hear the desert wind. Imagine the cold shimmer of the stars. Let Walter's burning determination soften into a whisper within you. The path may be dark, but here, you can surrender to rest and drift peacefully into sleep. With each passing step into the desert, Walter White and Jesse Pinkman sank deeper. The blue crystals were no longer just a product. They had become a signal, pulling them into a fate with no return. Jesse felt the growing danger all around them, while Walter's calmness left him both awed and unsettled. One day, Jesse arrived at the RV, frustration in his voice. "They don't just want the product, Walter. They want to control us. If this keeps up, it'll destroy us both." Walter stayed quiet for a moment, folding his hands on the table before speaking softly. "Jesse, death is already close to me. But for my family's future, I have to take this risk. Sometimes to win, you must accept every variable in the equation." The weight of those words settled heavily in Jesse's chest. In Walter's eyes, there was no fear of dying, only a burning desire to leave something behind. At home, Skylar's suspicions grew sharper. Walter's silences stretched longer, and she often found him sitting alone in the kitchen late at night. One evening, she gathered her courage. "Walter, you're hiding something. I can feel it." Walter looked at her, then turned away. For a fleeting moment, guilt flickered in his eyes, but the only words he offered were, "I'm just tired." Skylar didn't believe him, but she let it rest. Still, her heart carried a growing weight of doubt. In the desert, another trial awaited. The new buyers were more dangerous than any they had seen before. The wind circling the RV felt like the warning of an oncoming storm. Jesse whispered, his voice tight, "They could kill us." Walter adjusted his glasses calmly and replied, "Or they could shape our future." The meeting began. The men examined the product, greed shining in their eyes. One held the crystal up to the light. "This is the purest thing I've ever seen," he said. Then he turned to Walter. "But everything pure can be corrupted. You'll work for us." Jesse's breath caught. But Walter did not move, his voice steady as stone. "No, I work for no one. I write the equation. If you want my product, you follow my rules." The desert wind howled, filling the silence. Walter's words were more than defiance. They were the declaration of a new identity. He was no longer just a teacher. He was someone announcing his power in the heart of darkness. The meeting ended in uneasy silence. Jesse trembled as he approached Walter. "You're insane! Standing up to them like that, it's suicide!" Walter walked back toward the RV, his voice calm. "Sometimes what looks like suicide is actually rebirth." That night at home, Skylar studied him carefully. She no longer recognized the man in front of her, but Walter held his silence. Inside, the new version of himself had grown too strong to fit within the walls of an ordinary life. Under the cold light of the desert stars, Walter had chosen his path. He didn't know where it would end, but one thing was certain: there was no turning back. The duality in Walter White's life grew sharper with every passing day. By day, he was a teacher explaining formulas on a chalkboard. By night, in a rusted RV deep in the desert, he was a chemist rewriting his fate. Moving between these two worlds quietly pushed him into an irreversible transformation. At home, Skylar saw the difference more clearly. His distant eyes, sleepless nights, and distracted silences, all of it weighed heavily on her heart. One evening at dinner, she asked, "Walter, are you really telling me everything?" A faint, unreadable smile touched his lips. His reply was short and cold. "Sometimes not telling is a way of protecting." The words planted deeper suspicion in her heart. In the desert, Walter and Jesse faced another test. Through Jesse's dangerous connections, new opportunities had arisen, but with those opportunities came shadows, faces that belonged to men who thrived on violence. Jesse warned him, "These aren't ordinary people." Walter's eyes showed no hesitation. "It makes no difference. The formula stays the same, the risk stays the same, only the chemistry of the equation changes." The silence inside the RV thickened. Jesse couldn't understand his calmness. His teacher, living under the shadow of death, seemed to have already made peace with every calculation. During one meeting with new buyers, tension boiled over. The men admired the product, but their greed was unmistakable. One leaned closer, his tone threatening. "A man like you can't run this on his own. You either join us, or this ends here." Jesse's pulse quickened. The desert wind howled, pressing the moment heavier onto them. But Walter didn't flinch. Lowering his voice, he looked over his glasses and said, "I am the one who writes the equation. If you want to work with me, you follow my rules." The words were a challenge, cast straight into the heart of danger. Jesse realized Walter was walking a thin line between madness and genius. Yet at the same time, it was this very defiance that made their product unique. That night, when Walter returned home, Skylar was still awake. She looked at him long and hard. "You're not the man I knew anymore," she whispered. Walter said nothing. His silence was heavier than any answer. The secret inside him had grown too large for words. Later, standing in the backyard beneath the stars, Walter's mind held a single thought. My time is short, but with every breath, I leave a mark on the future. The desert's silence seemed to take in his vow. For Walter White and Jesse Pinkman, there was no turning back now. As the name of the blue crystals spread through the streets, the circle around them grew tighter. Jesse could hardly bear the pressure anymore. To him, this business was a tightrope between life and death. But for Walter, it was something else entirely, the legacy of a man running out of time. One evening inside the RV, Jesse finally snapped. "Walter, this has gone too far. I can't even sleep at night anymore. I keep thinking someone's going to knock on our door and end it all." Walter adjusted his glasses, fixing Jesse with a calm stare. "Fear consumes you, Jesse, but my time is too short. Fear no longer means anything to me." Jesse fell silent. Outside the narrow window, the horizon burned with a crimson sunset, as if to underline Walter's words with fire. At home, Skylar's suspicions deepened. Walter's disappearances, his late nights away, his sudden changes in mood. One night, she found a notebook on his desk. It was filled with chemical formulas, numbers, and notes she couldn't understand. Skylar told herself they were related to his illness, but in her heart, a darker possibility began to grow. Soon after, Jesse told Walter they had to meet a new buyer. This man was harder, sharper, more suspicious than the others. They met at the edge of the desert, where the wind rattled the RV and silence pressed down heavy on them. The man examined the product, turning the crystal in the fading light. Then he looked at Walter and said, "You look like a teacher, but this isn't a teacher's game. If you want to keep going, you'll answer to me." Fear tightened Jesse's face. The threat could have ended everything. But Walter's eyes carried no fear, only cold determination. His voice dropped low. "I'm not a teacher. I'm the man who writes the equation. If you want my product, you follow my rules." The desert wind howled louder at that moment, as if answering him. The man stared at Walter in silence, then placed the crystal back in his bag. A faint, unreadable smile touched his lips. Whether it was acceptance or a promise of danger, neither Jesse nor Walter could tell. When the meeting ended, Jesse was trembling. He turned on Walter, shouting, "You're insane! Challenging them like that! It's going to get us both killed!" Walter walked slowly back to the RV, his voice calm as stone. "No, Jesse. Sometimes defiance is the only way to survive." That night at home, Skylar was waiting. Her eyes filled with worry as she said, "Walter, you're not the man I knew anymore." Walter didn't respond. The secret inside him had already begun to reshape him into someone unrecognizable. Later, standing alone under the stars, Walter whispered to himself, "My time may be short, but the mark I leave will last forever." Walter White's transformation was becoming impossible to ignore. For Jesse Pinkman, the journey felt like a nightmare, swinging between fear and awe. As the name of the blue crystals spread through the streets, their lives grew into a more tangled equation. One day, on the edge of the desert, Jesse burst out, "Death may not mean anything to you, but it still means something to me." "They're going to corner us, Walter. I still want to live." Walter stared at him. His eyes held no anger, only a chilling resolve. "Jesse, sometimes you don't live to survive. You live to leave something behind." The words choked Jesse. His old teacher was gone. Before him stood someone else. At home, Skylar noticed his disappearances more sharply. One night, she opened Walter's bag in the living room. Inside, she found chemical notes, strange measurements, things she couldn't understand. Her unease deepened. Meanwhile, Walter worked inside the RV. His hands moved with precision, almost as if the process had become a ritual. Jessie stood nearby, whispering, "You're not the same anymore." Walter didn't reply. That night, back at home, Skylar only looked at him. This time, she said nothing. The silence was louder than words. Walter went into the bathroom. He stood before the mirror, staring at his reflection for a long time. In his own eyes, he saw a stranger. Softly, he whispered, "This is my new face." The silence returned, heavier than before. Walter and Jessie's world was closing in. The fame of the blue crystals grew, surrounding them with both admiration and threat. Jessie's anxiety reached its breaking point. One night in the RV, Jessie exploded. "You look them in the eyes and keep defying them. If we keep this up, they'll tear us apart." Walter replied evenly. "Jessie, sometimes stepping back means death. Sometimes standing tall is the only way to live." The next morning at breakfast, Skylar's suspicion became unbearable. The silence at the table felt like a wall of ice. With tears brimming in her eyes, she said, "You're not the man I knew anymore." Walter said nothing. He only broke his bread into pieces. Deep inside, he knew she was right. That evening, another meeting awaited at the edge of the desert. The sky blazed crimson as the sun sank. The men examined the product, their admiration quickly sharpening into threat. One leaned toward Walter. "You're smart, but you're alone. And the alone never last long." Walter adjusted his glasses, his voice calm and steady. "Being alone can be the greatest strength, because no one else can write the equation for you." The men stared at him silently, then backed away. Jessie exhaled heavily. "One day they really will kill you," he said. Walter's reply was short. "Maybe that day will be the day I'm truly born." That night at home, Walter stepped into the yard. The starry sky stretched above him, heavy with silence. He lifted his eyes and thought, "Even as the darkness grows, I will create my own light." There was no turning back now. Now, close your eyes. Picture the crimson desert sunset. Feel the quiet of the stars. Let Walter's resolve to create his own light echo gently within you. The path may be uncertain, but here you can rest and drift into sleep. Every step Walter White and Jesse Pinkman took pulled them deeper into the whirlpool. It was no longer just about the chemistry of the blue crystals. It was about facing the darkest sides of human nature. One night, Jesse paced nervously inside the RV, his voice breaking as he shouted, "I can't take this anymore. They're playing with us, Walter, and we're their puppets. How can you stay so calm?" Walter set down the beaker, turned to him and spoke in a measured voice. "Because I'm calculating, Jesse. They move with anger, I move with formulas. That difference will decide who stands at the end." Jesse slammed his fist on the table. For him, this was no longer science. It was survival. But Walter's eyes reflected only the cold clarity of logic. At home, Skylar grew even more suspicious. One evening, she caught Walter whispering into the phone. She couldn't hear the words, but the hardness in his eyes pierced her heart like a blade. "What are you hiding from me?" she asked. Walter lowered his head in silence. The silence was more frightening than any answer. The next day, Walter and Jessie arrived at a new meeting. This time, the setting was different, a dim warehouse lit by harsh white lights. The man across the table examined the product, turning it between his fingers. "Perfect," he said, "but perfection is expensive. Here are my terms." Jessie's heart thundered, but Walter's face didn't betray a flicker of fear. "I don't accept your terms," he said firmly. The man's brows furrowed. Silence dropped over the warehouse like ice. Jessie leaned toward Walter, whispering, "What are you doing?" Walter's reply was as clear as a formula. "If I don't hold control, nothing means anything." The man smirked, slipped the crystal into his bag, and left with a single phrase, "We'll see you game." When the meeting ended, Jessie exploded. "You're tracking us to our deaths." "They'll come back, and next time they won't be joking." Walter remained calm. Sometimes risk is the only way to survive. That night, Walter returned home. Skylar waited in the living room. This time she asked no questions. Her eyes alone said, "I don't know you anymore." Walter removed his jacket, passed by her in silence. The secret inside him had grown too vast to be hidden in words. Past midnight, he sat in the kitchen with a glass of water, his hands covering his face. The silence pressed down heavier than his heartbeat. Softly, he whispered to himself, "Whatever awaits me at the end of this road, there's no turning back now." The equations Walter White built no longer lived only in glass tubes of the lab. They shaped every moment of his life. For him, chemistry had become not the study of elements, but the mathematics of fate. Jessie grew increasingly afraid of this path. One night, sitting in the car beside Walter, he whispered, "You know, sometimes it feels like this is just a game to you. But for me, this is real life, Walter. My life." Walter stared ahead, his hands still on the wheel. His voice was cold, controlled. "Jessie, life itself is the game. If you lose, it ends. If you win, no one can erase you." The words tightened Jessie's chest. Once again, Walter's transformation stood clear. At home, Skylar could no longer carry the weight of secrets. One evening, she confided in her sister Marie, "Walter doesn't tell me anything. It's like he's built a wall keeping me out. I feel like I'm living with a stranger." Marie tried to comfort her, but Skylar's fear only deepened. Meanwhile, Walter and Jessie attended a meeting in an abandoned factory outside the city. This time, more experienced, more dangerous faces sat across the table. The men studied the product, nodding to each other. Their leader smiled. "Perfect. But perfection isn't enough. I want trust. You won't betray me, will you, Walter?" Walter adjusted his glasses. His voice held neither fear nor hesitation. "For me, trust is like a formula's certainty. If it's right once, it's always right." The man chuckled. "Good. But remember, one small mistake in a formula can cause an explosion." A chill ran through Jessie's chest. The gulf between Walter's calm and the man's threat forced him into trembling silence. That night, Walter returned home. Skylar waited at the door. Her eyes were wet with tears, but she didn't scream, didn't demand. She only whispered, "You don't even know who you are anymore." Walter said nothing. Though storms raged inside him, not a single word escaped. Slowly, he went upstairs to their bedroom. Awake past midnight, he walked to the window. The city lights shimmered in the distance. He thought to himself, "In the darkness, I will choose my own path. And that path has no return." The silence wrapped around him. Even the cold air outside couldn't shake his decision. Walter White's world was closing in. The circle around him tightened, and with it, his resolve hardened. He was no longer fighting only for money or illness. He was fighting to prove his own power. Jesse watched this descent with fear. One evening in the RV, he shouted, "You're not a teacher anymore. You're someone who doesn't play by any rules. I can't walk this path with you." Walter stayed silent. From behind his glasses, he looked at Jesse and replied slowly, "All my life I've followed rules, Jesse. They gave me nothing. Now I make the rules." The words shook Jesse. Walter's voice carried not anger, but the chilling weight of certainty. At home, Skylar could no longer hide the cracks. Tearfully, she confided in Marie. "Every day, Walter drifts further away from me. When I talk to him, it's like talking to a stranger. But the worst part is, sometimes I see something in his eyes I've never known before." Marie tried to console her, but deep down, Skylar knew something had broken beyond repair. Later, Walter and Jesse met a new buyer. The atmosphere was tense, a cramped room filled with cigarette smoke. The buyer placed the product on the table, tapped it hard with his fingers, then fixed his eyes on Walter. "You're smart, but reckless. People like you either rise high or fall very fast." Walter gave a faint smile. "To rise, sometimes you must be willing to fall." Jesse buried his face in his hands. Walter's defiance had become frighteningly routine. That night at home, Walter found Skylar waiting in the living room, but there was no argument this time. She only whispered, "I can't talk to you anymore." Walter passed her in silence. He didn't reply because words no longer served him. The secret inside him swallowed every answer. Past midnight, he stepped into the backyard. The grass was damp beneath his feet. Above him, clouds covered the sky. There were no stars tonight. The darkness was thicker than ever. Walter lifted his head and thought, "Even without light, I will see my way. Because the path is in my hands now." The silence sealed his decision. The dry Albuquerque wind rattled rusted doors on the city's edge, while Walter White's equations echoed not on paper, but in people's breaths. The whisper around the blue crystals had grown and knotted into a name. Tuco, unpredictable, volatile, a man whose only rule was himself. Jesse's lips trembled as he said it. "Walter, do we really have to meet this guy? He doesn't do deals." Walter adjusted his glasses. Sometimes the solution hides in the hardest unknown. Day. In the kitchen, Skylar watched Walter quietly. Notebooks, phone calls, vanishing evenings. Each laid another brick in the wall between them. "You won't make dinner? Schoolwork?" The rest of the sentence lived in her stare. "I don't believe you." Dusk. An old contact guided them to a warehouse outside town. Concrete walls, a flicker of broken fluorescence, dust-bruised light leaking through high windows. The door moaned open. Inside stood Tuco Salamanca, eyes sparking with a too-quick impatience, his men a solid wall behind him. Tuco rapped his knuckles twice on the table. "Blue stuff." "Where?" Jesse handed over the product. Tuco lifted it to the light, a low whistle slipping from his teeth. "Clean, real clean." His gaze hardened. "But clean ain't enough. I want speed. I want volume and respect." The word hung, blade bright. Jesse stepped back. Walter spoke with a teacher's calm. "Speed, volume, possible, but my terms, upfront payment, safe delivery, no violence." Tuco's mouth tilted. Smile or threat, impossible to tell. "Violence? Me? Haha, you're funny, teacher." One of his men shifted. Metal scraped concrete. Jesse's breath snagged. Then Walter set a small, ordinary-looking piece on the table, crystal-like, but carrying a very different reaction. No instructions. Chemistry remembers better than words. He turned to Tuco. "Another product. Different. A simple demonstration." Walter cradled the piece, stepped back, and let it fall on the concrete. The air cracked. A sharp pop rang out. A shiver of light dust rippled the room. Glass trembled. The fluorescents coughed and blinked. No one was hurt, but everyone was stunned. Tuco's men flinched backward. Jesse blinked the world back into shape. Walter spoke the way he'd explain an experiment, calm as chalk on slate. "As you see, wrong place, wrong touch, uncontrolled results. Make a deal with me and I give you clarity. Production is mine, distribution is yours, upfront payment. And as promised," he placed each word, "no violence." Tuco watched the stuttering light, then Walter's face. Silence ballooned, pressing on ribs. Abruptly, he laughed, short, bright, nerve-pricking. "You're crazy, but useful crazy." He slammed the table. "Fine, teacher. Up front for the first batch. Work fast. Work pretty, or..." He didn't finish. Not finishing was the threat. Jesse's knees went weak. Walter sealed it with a measured nod. Money hit the table with the weight of a metal box. Numbers blurred in Jesse's eyes. In Walter's, they clicked into place like a solved equation. Night. Outside, the wind circled their bodies. "You just walked us to our graves," Jesse muttered. Walter gave no answer. In his eyes, a new name flickered. Letters of a coming mask. Home. Skylar waited awake. A ribbon of light spilled through the door. Walter unlaced his shoes, moved along the corridor's shadow. She didn't ask where he'd been. Her look asked what he was turning them into. No reply came. City. In the distance, sirens tested the dark like a red-blue pulse. Walter stopped, peered into the night. His thought flattened into a line. The equation is set. The terms are written. There is no return. The camera, our imagined one, drifts back to the warehouse. Tuco studies a single dust fleck left on the table. His smile thins to a line. "Teacher," he murmurs. "Nice." And the season closes in the humming silence where threat and agreement share the same breath. Now, close your eyes. Hear concrete holding the echo. Feel the cold draft slipping from the warehouse. Think of a single crystal grain, quiet on steel. Danger isn't far, but tonight the story's whisper can carry you safely into sleep.